Close your eyes for a moment and think about your childhood neighborhood. Picture the houses, the yards, the families that lived around you. Now imagine discovering that one of those familiar places, one of those ordinary homes you passed every single day, was harboring something truly sinister, something that changed the lives of everyone who came near it. What would you do if you realized, years later, that you had been in danger all along and never knew it? Today, we're going beyond simply recounting scary stories. We're diving deep into the psychological patterns, the behavioral red flags, and the environmental factors that create dangerous situations in seemingly normal neighborhoods. This isn't just about being scared. This is about understanding the mechanisms of manipulation, recognizing predatory behavior, and learning how to protect yourself and the people you care about. By the end of this discussion, you'll understand why certain warning signs should never be ignored, how childhood trauma creates cycles of violence, and what you can do when you suspect something is very wrong next door. The stories I'm about to share aren't just disturbing tales. They're case studies in manipulation, psychological warfare, and the failure of communities to protect vulnerable individuals. Each narrative contains patterns that repeat themselves across thousands of similar situations every single year. And the most terrifying part, most people never recognize these patterns until it's far too late. Section 1. The Architecture of Danger. Let's begin by understanding something crucial about dangerous environments. They don't announce themselves with flashing warning signs. Instead, they hide behind layers of normalcy, deteriorating slowly over time until the rot becomes undeniable. When we examine homes and families where abuse, neglect, or predatory behavior occurs, we find consistent environmental markers that tell a story long before anyone speaks a word. Consider the physical environment first. Properties that fall into severe disrepair often signal more than simple financial hardship. When a home shows signs of prolonged neglect, overgrown vegetation consuming the yard, trash accumulating for weeks or months, broken objects left where they fell, we're witnessing a visual representation of internal chaos. These aren't just aesthetic problems. They reflect a household where basic standards of care have collapsed, where the adults responsible for maintaining safety and order have either given up or prioritized other things entirely. The psychology behind environmental neglect runs deeper than laziness or poverty. Research in environmental psychology demonstrates that people who maintain severely deteriorating living spaces often experience profound disconnection from reality, depression, substance abuse, or personality disorders that prevent them from engaging in normal caretaking behaviors. When children grow up in these environments, they internalize the message that their surroundings, and by extension they themselves, don't deserve care or attention. This creates psychological damage that can last a lifetime. But here's what makes these situations particularly insidious. The neglect rarely distributes evenly throughout the home. Often, you'll find that while common areas descend into squalor, one particular room remains pristine, almost obsessively maintained. This pattern reveals something deeply disturbing about the household dynamics. It shows that the capacity for cleanliness and order exists, but it's being hoarded by one individual who has created a sanctuary for themselves while allowing everyone else to live in filth. This isn't accidental. It's a form of psychological control, a way of asserting dominance and demonstrating that comfort and dignity are privileges that can be granted or withheld at will. The contrast between pristine personal spaces and communal squalor serves another purpose entirely. It maintains the facade of normalcy to outsiders. When authorities or concerned neighbors inquire about the household's well-being, the controlling individual can present themselves as put together and reasonable, offering their clean, organized space as evidence that nothing is wrong. Meanwhile, the rest of the home tells the real story, one of neglect, chaos, and suffering that remains hidden from public view. Understanding these environmental patterns helps us recognize danger before it escalates. When you see a property that exhibits these characteristics, especially when children are involved, you're not just looking at an eyesore. You're potentially witnessing a cry for help that nobody has learned to interpret correctly. The accumulation of trash, the broken objects left in yards, the general sense that time has stopped and decay has won, these are all symptoms of a household in crisis, one where vulnerable individuals may be suffering behind closed doors. Section 2. The predatory personality. Now that we understand the environmental context, we need to examine the behavioral patterns that emerge from these dysfunctional households. Predatory individuals, whether they're adults or children exhibiting early warning signs, display remarkably consistent characteristics. Learning to recognize these patterns is essential for protecting yourself and others. Let's talk about boundary violation as a foundational predatory behavior. Healthy human interaction operates on an understood framework of personal space, consent, and mutual respect. Predatory individuals systematically violate these boundaries to test victims, establish dominance, and normalize inappropriate behavior. This process often begins subtly. Someone might appear at your home without invitation or warning, not once as a possible mistake, but repeatedly as an established pattern. They might enter your personal spaces, your room, your property, without permission. They might help themselves to your belongings, your food, your time, as though they have an inherent right to these things. Each boundary violation serves multiple purposes. First, it tests whether you'll enforce your own limits. If you fail to object strongly, the predator learns they can continue escalating. Second, it establishes a power dynamic where your comfort and consent become irrelevant. Third, it normalizes the invasion, making it seem like this is just how the relationship works. Over time, victims begin to doubt their own right to privacy and personal space. They start to question whether they're being too sensitive or unreasonable for wanting basic respect. Children who exhibit predatory tendencies often do so because they're mimicking patterns they've witnessed or experienced themselves. When a young person shows complete disregard for others' boundaries, engages in manipulative behavior, or displays inappropriate aggression, we need to recognize these as symptoms of a deeper problem. These children haven't developed these patterns in isolation. They're products of environments where boundaries are routinely violated, where manipulation is modeled as normal interaction, and where violence lurks beneath the surface of daily life. The obsessive behavior patterns we sometimes see in these individuals reveal another crucial aspect of the predatory mindset. When someone becomes fixated on a particular person, demanding constant attention and reacting with disproportionate anger when their demands aren't met, we're witnessing a fundamental failure to recognize others as autonomous human beings with their own needs and desires. This isn't just clinginess or insecurity. It's a form of objectification where the target exists solely to fulfill the predator's emotional needs. Understanding anger as a control mechanism is essential here. Predatory individuals use anger strategically. They've learned that explosive reactions to minor disappointments can intimidate others into compliance. If you cancel plans and the response is rage rather than understanding, that's not normal disappointment. That's calculated manipulation designed to make you feel guilty for asserting your own needs. Over time, this conditioning causes victims to prioritize the predator's feelings over their own well-being, creating a relationship dynamic built entirely on fear and obligation. The escalation pattern in predatory behavior follows a predictable trajectory. It begins with minor boundary violations and social awkwardness that might be dismissed as quirky or harmless. As the predator gains confidence and the victim becomes conditioned to accept inappropriate behavior, the violations intensify. What starts as showing up uninvited progresses to entering homes without permission, then to veiled threats, then to overt displays of violence or weapons. Each stage builds on the previous one, and each stage becomes normalized before the next escalation occurs. This is why early intervention is so critical. Once predatory patterns become established, they're extraordinarily difficult to interrupt. The predator has invested significant time and energy into grooming their victim, breaking down boundaries, and establishing dominance. They won't surrender this control willingly. When victims finally attempt to extract themselves from these relationships, the predator often responds with escalating desperation and violence. This is the most dangerous phase, the moment when the predator realizes they're losing control and becomes capable of extreme actions. We also need to discuss the role of alternative reality in predatory psychology. Many individuals who engage in predatory behavior have constructed elaborate internal narratives that justify their actions. They genuinely believe they're the victim, that others are conspiring against them, that their anger is righteous, and their violations are justified. This disconnection from consensus reality makes them particularly dangerous because they're not constrained by normal social consequences or moral frameworks. They've created a story in which they're the protagonist fighting against an unfair world, and anyone who opposes them becomes a villain in their personal narrative. Section 3. The manipulation expert. While some predatory individuals operate through overt aggression and boundary violation, others employ sophisticated manipulation techniques that can be even more dangerous because they're harder to identify and resist. These individuals understand human psychology intuitively and use that understanding to exploit vulnerabilities, create dependence, and maintain control while appearing helpful or even benevolent. The initial approach of a skilled manipulator always involves identification of vulnerability. They're looking for people who need something, whether it's help with a physical task, emotional support, validation, or simply attention. The first interaction is carefully designed to make the target feel special, capable, and appreciated. By creating a positive emotional experience, the manipulator establishes themselves as a source of good feelings, making the target more receptive to future interactions. This positive initial experience serves as emotional leverage for everything that follows. Once someone has helped you and made you feel good about yourself, you naturally feel inclined to reciprocate. The manipulator exploits this social obligation, gradually escalating requests and introducing ideas or experiences that push boundaries. The key is that each step feels small enough to accept while moving the relationship in a direction that serves the manipulator's interests. Spiritual manipulation represents a particularly insidious form of control because it operates on the level of fundamental beliefs and identity. When someone introduces concepts like third eyes, special sight, or hidden truths, they're not just sharing interesting ideas. They're attempting to establish themselves as a gatekeeper to important knowledge, positioning themselves as someone who can see what others cannot, who understands realities that remain hidden to normal people. This creates a power dynamic where the manipulator becomes the interpreter of truth, and the target becomes dependent on their guidance. The presentation of occult symbols and practices accelerates this process. For someone raised in a particular religious tradition, encountering pentagrams, ritual objects, and texts associated with practices their faith condemns creates immediate psychological conflict. The manipulator counts on this reaction because it reinforces their position as someone operating outside normal rules and constraints. They're demonstrating power and knowledge that exists beyond conventional moral frameworks, suggesting that they have access to forces or information that could be dangerous to oppose. The creation of sanctuary spaces is another crucial manipulation technique. By maintaining one area that feels safe, beautiful, and ordered while allowing chaos to reign elsewhere, the manipulator creates a physical representation of the choice they're offering. You can have beauty and order, but only by accepting my control and entering my domain. Everything outside this space is chaos and filth, but here, under my guidance, you can experience something better. This spatial metaphor becomes internalized, convincing victims that their only escape from dysfunction is deeper involvement with the manipulator. We need to understand how manipulators use information asymmetry to maintain control. They reveal personal details strategically, sharing just enough to create intimacy and obligation while keeping their true intentions hidden. They ask probing questions that extract information about your life, your fears, your desires, and your vulnerabilities, all while presenting themselves as merely interested and caring. This intelligence gathering allows them to customize their approach, identifying exactly what buttons to push and what promises to make to keep you engaged. The isolation process begins subtly. A manipulator will express concern about your other relationships, suggesting that friends or family don't understand you the way they do. They'll create situations where choosing them means disappointing others, gradually training you to prioritize their needs over all other relationships. Over time, your social circle shrinks as people become exhausted with your unavailability or concerned about the relationship's dynamics. This isolation serves the manipulator perfectly because it removes external perspectives that might help you recognize the unhealthy patterns. Section 4. CYCLES of abuse and neglect. To truly understand dangerous neighborhood situations, we must examine how abuse and neglect perpetuate themselves across generations, creating environments where predatory behavior flourishes and children suffer consequences that last lifetimes. These cycles don't emerge from nowhere. They're passed down, refined, and intensified through families that never learned healthy patterns of relating to one another. Child neglect takes many forms, but all forms share a common core of failure to meet basic developmental needs. When we see children with persistent speech impediments that should have been addressed years earlier, we're witnessing medical neglect. When children appear in dirty clothes day after day, when they seem perpetually hungry, when they flinch at sudden movements, we're seeing children who aren't receiving adequate care, protection, or emotional support. These observable signs indicate suffering that runs much deeper than what's visible on the surface. The psychological impact of neglect often exceeds that of overt abuse because neglect communicates a fundamental message of worthlessness. A child experiencing neglect learns that their needs don't matter, that they don't deserve care, that they're fundamentally unimportant to the people who should love them most. This creates profound attachment issues, difficulty trusting others, and a distorted sense of self-worth that influences every relationship throughout their life. When one parent is absent due to incarceration, and the other is preoccupied with their own needs, children exist in a vacuum of adult guidance and protection. They raise themselves according to whatever models they can find, often mimicking the worst behaviors they've witnessed because those behaviors at least represent power and agency. A child who has been powerless their entire life may embrace aggression and boundary violation as their first taste of control over their environment. The presence of elderly relatives in these households adds another layer of tragedy. When grandmothers are left behind to die alone in decaying homes, when their deaths barely register emotional impact on the family, we're seeing the complete erosion of human empathy and connection. These aren't just sad situations. They're evidence of a household where fundamental human values have been so thoroughly abandoned that suffering and death become routine, unremarkable aspects of daily existence. What happens to children in these environments? They learn that people are disposable, that suffering is normal, that violence is an acceptable response to frustration, and that manipulating others is how you get your needs met. They internalize dysfunction so thoroughly that they can't imagine alternatives. Even if they want to escape, they lack the psychological tools and emotional frameworks to build healthier lives. The cycle continues because the damage runs too deep to repair without intensive intervention. The psychiatric placement of children from these homes represents a complex issue. On one hand, removing a violent child protects other family members and potentially provides the child with treatment they desperately need. On the other hand, It often becomes a convenient way for families to dispose of the most visibly damaged child without addressing the systemic problems that created the situation. The child becomes the identified patient, carrying all the family's dysfunction as their personal pathology, while the underlying dynamics remain unchanged. What about the children left behind? They continue suffering in silence, their own traumas unacknowledged because they haven't yet manifested in ways that force intervention. They watch siblings disappear into institutions, parents cycle through jail, and grandparents die alone, learning with each event that human connections are temporary and pain is permanent. These children grow into adults carrying unprocessed trauma, often perpetuating the exact patterns they suffered under because those patterns are the only relationship models they've ever known. Section 5. The haunted house phenomenon. Now we arrive at perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these situations. What happens to places where significant suffering has occurred? Can locations themselves become tainted by the darkness they've contained? While we might be tempted to dismiss such ideas as superstition, there's a psychological phenomenon worth examining. The human brain records traumatic experiences spatially, associating specific locations with danger, fear, and suffering. When we return to these places, even years later, those associations trigger powerful emotional and physical responses. Consider what happens when a home witnesses years of abuse, neglect, manipulation, and death. Every room contains memories of suffering. The walls absorb the sounds of crying children, violent arguments, and desperate isolation. Even if you believe nothing supernatural is occurring, you can't deny that these locations carry psychological weight. They represent concentrated human misery, and that misery leaves traces that sensitive individuals can detect on some level. The persistence of physical symbols adds another dimension to this phenomenon. When pentagrams are carved into floors beneath carpets, when ritual objects are hidden in walls during renovations, when the architecture itself reflects the twisted psychology of former inhabitants, the space retains a connection to its dark history. New owners may strip away visible evidence, but the bones of the building remember what occurred within them. People who move into homes with troubled histories often report unsettling experiences that they struggle to explain rationally. Strange sounds, feelings of being watched, overwhelming negative emotions in particular rooms, all of these can be attributed to psychological projection or heightened awareness of the space's history. But what if there's more to it? What if locations that witness extreme human suffering become imprinted with that energy in ways we don't fully understand? The renovation paradox illustrates this perfectly. You can tear down walls, install new floors, replace every surface, and create a space that looks completely different. Yet people who know the history still feel uncomfortable there. They experience physical symptoms like nausea, headaches, and anxiety when entering specific rooms. Their bodies respond to something their conscious minds can't quite identify, some residual presence or energy that persists despite all attempts to erase it. This phenomenon extends beyond individual sensitivity. Pets often react to these spaces, displaying fear or aggression toward areas with no apparent triggers. Animals lack the cultural conditioning that might make humans imagine supernatural presences, yet they still respond to something within these locations. Their reactions suggest that whatever lingers in these places operates on a level that bypasses conscious interpretation. Whether you believe in literal hauntings or prefer psychological explanations, the practical reality remains the same. Homes where extreme abuse, neglect, and suffering occurred often feel wrong to inhabitants, regardless of how thoroughly they've been renovated. This wrongness affects mental health, relationships, and overall well-being. People find themselves unable to relax in these spaces, constantly on edge, experiencing intrusive thoughts about the location's history. The business of selling and buying homes with dark histories reveals how seriously people take these concerns. Disclosure laws vary, but most places don't require sellers to reveal deaths or crimes that occurred on the property unless directly asked. This means countless people move into homes without knowing the suffering those walls contain. When they later discover the truth, they often report that it explains feelings and experiences they couldn't previously understand. Section 6. Recognition and protection. We've explored the environmental markers, behavioral patterns, manipulation techniques, and lasting impacts of dangerous neighborhood situations. Now, we must address the most important question. How do you protect yourself and others when you recognize these warning signs? What practical steps can you take when you suspect something is very wrong next door? First and foremost, trust your instincts. Your subconscious mind processes far more information than reaches conscious awareness. When something feels wrong about a person, place, or situation, that feeling reflects real observations that your brain has compiled into an emotional warning signal. Our culture often pressures us to ignore these instincts, to rationalize away our concerns, to give people the benefit of the doubt even when every alarm bell is ringing. Resist this pressure. Your safety and well-being matter more than politeness or social convention. Document everything. If you're experiencing harassment, boundary violations, or threatening behavior, create a detailed record of every incident. Note dates, times, witnesses, and specific actions or words. Take photographs of property damage, threatening messages, or concerning behavior. This documentation becomes crucial if you need to involve law enforcement or seek protective orders. Without concrete evidence, your concerns may be dismissed as overreaction or personality conflict. Establish and enforce firm boundaries immediately. The moment someone violates your space, property, or comfort, address it directly and unambiguously. Don't soften your response with apologies or qualifications. Say no clearly and mean it completely. Many predatory individuals rely on social conditioning that makes people reluctant to cause confrontation. By enforcing boundaries firmly from the first violation, you demonstrate that you won't be an easy target. When dealing with manipulative individuals, minimize contact and information sharing. Don't explain yourself extensively, don't share personal details, and don't allow them to engage you in long conversations. Gray rock technique, responding with minimal emotion and information, often works effectively because it provides nothing for the manipulator to work with. They need emotional engagement to maintain control, so denying them that engagement disrupts their strategy. If you recognize signs of child abuse or neglect, you have both a moral and legal obligation to report. Contact Child Protective Services or law enforcement with specific, detailed observations. Don't assume someone else has already reported or that authorities are already involved. Your report could be the one that finally triggers intervention. Yes, reporting feels uncomfortable and potentially ruins your relationship with the family, but children's safety must take priority over adult comfort. Create support systems and maintain connections outside concerning relationships. Predatory individuals and manipulators thrive when their targets are isolated. By maintaining strong friendships, family relationships, and community connections, you ensure that multiple people can recognize if something goes wrong and intervene. Tell trusted friends about concerning situations so someone knows what you're dealing with. For young people navigating friendships with individuals showing warning signs, please understand that you're not responsible for fixing them. You can't save someone through friendship if they're displaying predatory or violent tendencies. Protecting yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. Tell adults you trust about concerning behavior, even if you fear being dismissed or causing trouble. The temporary embarrassment of being wrong is infinitely preferable to the permanent consequences of staying silent when you're right. Finally, remember that dangerous people don't always look dangerous. They don't announce their intentions or advertise their pathologies. They often appear normal, friendly, even charming initially. This is why pattern recognition matters so much. Look beyond surface presentation to behavioral consistency. Watch how people treat others when they think no one important is watching. Notice who maintains control through fear rather than mutual respect. These observations reveal truth that polite conversation conceals. The stories we've examined today aren't just entertainment. They're warnings encoded in real experiences. They teach us that evil doesn't always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it lives next door, hiding behind overgrown hedges and collapsing porches. Sometimes it smiles and calls itself a truth seer. Sometimes it stands in dark theaters, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to act. By understanding these patterns, recognizing these warning signs, and taking protective action when necessary, we give ourselves and others the best possible chance of staying safe in an often dangerous world. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and never dismiss your own discomfort for the sake of being polite. Your safety is worth far more than anyone's temporary feelings.